Good morning and welcome to Truck Weight Analysis, Configuring Trucks to Comply with State Regulations. TruckScience partnered with NTEA in 2019 to provide members with a next-level solution for calculating axle weights. So we extend a special welcome to NTEA members joining us this morning. I had a quick glance at the guests already joined a few moments ago, and in a sure sign that it's 2025, I even noticed that some AI note takers have taken time out of their day to attend this webinar. My name is Sarah O'Grady and I'm the Chief Sales Officer at TruckScience. So compliance with US federal, interstate and state road regulations, as well as provincial regulations in Canada, is essential when configuring trucks. It's important to bear in mind what the regulations are for your jurisdiction, but also for other jurisdictions if the vehicle will be operated in more than one state or province, or you're selling trucks further afield. This webinar will cover how to configure efficient trucks that comply with regulations. It will include a live demo of the TruckScience Axle Weight Calculator using a Class 8 vehicle. Of course, compliance with road regulations is not our only concern. We need to comply with OEM ratings, including gross vehicle weight rating, gross axle weight ratings, etc. We need to ensure that axle weight distribution supports steering and braking ability, for example, by ensuring that a significant portion of the total weight is carried on the front axle. We normally have a goal of maximizing payload capacity. We want to right-size the truck, both to reduce capital cost and reduce fuel consumption. And we want to avoid undue maintenance or rework, or indeed invalidating the vehicle warranty. We need to be mindful of rollover stability by keeping the centre of gravity as low as possible. And then turning radius becomes important, for example, for garbage trucks that need to turn in residential areas. There are lots of other considerations too, including site infrastructure, driver needs, and internal standards stipulated by your organisation, and indeed whether a CDL is required. But in general, those are some of the things we need to keep in mind when laying out a vehicle. Focus of today's webinar, however, is regulations and the impact that those will have on payload capacity. This webinar will examine how one truck fares across different states and provinces, some of the peculiarities between states, and how they do or do not apply bridge law. Many of you attending have been using TruckScience for years, others are seeing it for the first time today. So the pace may be a little fast or slow for the different levels of proficiency that are attending today. But if you wish to have a one-on-one session to walk through an example that's relevant to what you do in your company, or indeed if you're having difficulty with the calculation you're currently working on, we'll gladly set that up for you. We're also going to share the recording, as I said, and with the wonders of YouTube, you will be able to slow that down, pause it, or speed it up as you watch it back. Before we start, you might like to jot down a guesstimate of how much payload you would think you can get on this vehicle, legally, of course. In this case, there is definitely more than one correct answer. I think the best way to compare how regulatory limits differ from one state or province to another will be to look at some examples. So I'm going to jump straight into a live demo now. We're going to get through a lot. You're going to hear a lot of figures. If you do have a pen and paper handy, you might like to maybe keep an eye on what the current payload figure is. Might just help to stay focused on what we're doing. But I'm just going to switch now to my to TruckScience itself. So just bear with me for a moment here. And Paul, if you can just let me know that you can see the TruckScience interface, that would be great.
Yeah, we can see that all right. Thanks, sir.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, so our first step is to choose a chassis. And I'm just going to choose a Kenworth T880. And I'll just take this conventional day cab. So just to orientate yourself a little bit on the screen, On the left-hand side here, we have all the inputs. So you input specification information for the vehicle, body, equipment, and payload on the left-hand side. And I tend to kind of deal with them in that order. You can review compliance indicators at the bottom left here to check if your layout complies with the OEM ratings and regulations. You can examine weight distribution and maximum payload in this weight summary table on the right-hand side at the bottom. And you can select alternative views over here on the right. Lastly, you can complete some kind of completion actions up the top here, sharing reports, saving your calculation, etc. But we'll get to those later. Firstly, I'm going to just change the wheelbase of this chassis. So to change that dimension, I can just click on it and override it to 220 inches. You'll see as you're making changes, the interface is responding all of the time. I'm also going to shorten the afterframe here from 96 down to 54. And you can pop in these little dialogues to see more detailed dimensions from the vehicle, or indeed open it from the left-hand side. Our next step is to examine axle weight ratings. So we're going to set the ratings to the maximum this chassis typically go to. Because our focus here is regulations, we don't want to max out on the manufacturer ratings too soon, so we're going to upgrade the axle ratings before we start. So I'll just go to Vehicle, Weights and Axles, Axle 1 Front, and I'll find the gross axle weight rating for the front axle right here. I'm going to upgrade that to 23,000. You'll see as I'm making changes, they will reflect on the chassis or indeed in the weights table if applicable. Axle 2 to 3, again, I'm going to increase that from 40,000 to 46,000. And the total GVWR from 59 to 80,000. You'll have spotted that there are other fields we can change here too. So I'm just going to change the tires, the width of the tires on the front axle here as an example, from 16.7 inches to 17.5 inches. The tire width, changing the tire width allows you to take advantage of higher weight limits in some cases. Next, I'm going to add a body to this chassis and choose a dump body. And I'm going to choose this 16-foot dump body. I'll increase the cab gap just by simply dragging this body back. And before I do that, I should point out this payload of 27,269 pounds. It's highlighted in blue here. And you will notice that change as I increase the cab gap. And right away, we have a new payload figure of 26,565. We'll be seeing lots about that payload figure as we go along. So just to give you a quick rundown of what's happening here in the weight summary table, you have the distribution of weight by axle. So we have columns for front axle, rear axle group, and total. You have rows for chassis weight, crew, and the body, and those are all added up to get a total unladen weight, in this case of 22,207. Because the crew weight was included in the chassis weight in this case, it is set to 0. That is an option. You can specify that the crew weight is additional. The permissible row here, the third from the bottom, is the maximum permitted on each axle based on both the manufacturer ratings and the selected regulations. And if I click one of those to open it, you'll see that the gross axle weight rating that we specified was 23,000. The Bridger regulation limit, the current one is 20,000. So the lesser of the two applies, and that is 20,000 as the total permissible on that front axle. 51,500 again is the lesser of the 80,000 gross vehicle weight rating and the regulation limit of 51,500. As I mentioned, the payload defaults to the maximum achievable payload within the individual axle and total limits. I will encourage you or remind you to keep an eye on this figure as we go. It changes significantly as we make changes to the layout and as we move from one jurisdiction to another. Every change to the specification and layout of the chassis, body, equipment, and payload has the potential to affect that figure, that maximum payload figure. We cannot simply subtract the total unladen weight of 22,207 from the total permissible weight of 51,500 to calculate the maximum payload achievable. And that is because one of the axles may reach its limit before the gross vehicle weight rating or the total bridge limit. The maximum payload is automatically calculated to 26,565 in this case, and then added to the total unladen weight of 22,207 to get the gross weight of 48,772. And this gross weight is highlighted in green. In this case, it's almost 15,000 on the front axle, 34,000 on the rear, and almost 49,000 in the total column. The final two rows in this table, unused capacity and the utilization score, are basically two ways of expressing the same thing. And that is the gross weight as compared to the permissible weight. So permissible minus gross weight will give you the unused capacity, and then that unused and the gross weight as a percentage of the permissible is what you see there as the utilization score. For the rear axle group, we've got a current gross weight of 34,000, permissible of 34,000. So you can see that that is the axle that is the limiting factor in this case at 100% utilization. And this is despite the unused capacity of 2,728 pounds. In other words, the rear axle group has reached its limit before the GBWR or total bridge limit. But watch what happens to the maximum payload when we increase the cab gap by 6 inches. So I'm just going to move this body back by 6 inches, and we had 26,500. And it has fallen by 1,000 pounds to 25,500. This is of course because moving the body towards the rear moves more weight onto that rear axle, which was already maxed out at 100%. So we'll just undo that change. Next, I'm going to add a hoist here. So I go to my equipment library. There, and just search for a hoist. I'm just going to add this sample dump body hoist. You can click on the hoist to change some of its specification information or indeed the position. So again, I'm just going to move that 4 inches back. The weight of the hoist is now also included in this total unladen weight. And maybe unexpectedly, having added the hoist, because the hoist is putting more weight onto the front axle, its addition actually results in an increase in the maximum achievable payload to 26,078. I'm sorry, that is not an increase. It was already at 26,500, so it has dropped by about 400 pounds. But let's just note that the weight of the hoist itself was around 950 pounds, and adding that hoist has only decreased the payload by about 400 pounds, and that's obviously because of the weight it's exerting onto the front axle of 529 pounds. You can see that value right here. If you look at the compliance dashboard on the left-hand side here, you can see we've only got green ticks, all good. And that indicates that the layout complies with both the OEM or manufacturer ratings and the current regulations. We click into the regulatory compliance line to see which regulations are being applied, and you can see it's the US Federal Common Size and Weight Regulations. The federal regulations are basically a lowest common denominator for all the states. But we're going to just move around now from state to state to see how the local regulations affect our limits and our maximum payload. So before I switch to New York State regulations, I just want to point out the permissibles here of 20,000 pounds on the front, 34,000 on the rear, and 51,500 total. Just click on the settings here to change the regulations applied. And we clear the US Federal and add in New York State. So the maximum weight allowed on the tandem straight away rises from 34,000 to 36,000. We've new limits to work with now. 22,400 on the front, giving us an extra 2,500 pounds. 36,000 on the rear, giving us an extra 2,000. And we go from 51,500 to 55,000 total. So you can see then that the maximum payload is increased accordingly, and it goes from 26,078 up to 28,438, an increase of over 2,000 pounds. So we can achieve over 28,000 pounds of payload on New York State roads without a pusher axle. Let's try adding a pusher axle. Just open the chassis menu here, click weights and axles, click this flashing plus sign, and click pusher. The payload jumps by another 2,000 pounds to 30,703 pounds. Of course, the gain is partly offset by the weight of the pusher axle itself. So you might ask yourself if it's worth adding a pusher axle in this case. Examining the utilization rows at the very bottom shows us the 100% utilization of the regulation limit for the tri-axle group. Rear axles 2 to 4, we've got 0 pounds of unused capacity. And we've got nearly 99% utilization of the total permissible of 56,000 pounds. So you could argue that this is a well-balanced vehicle using practically all of the legal capacity of both the tri-axle group and the entire vehicle. We're sometimes asked, what is a safe utilization score? The utilization score is an indication of how close you are to either the state or provincial limits or the weight the manufacturer has rated the chassis at. So using 100% of what the manufacturer and your state or province has approved will seem safe to me. But if in doubt, this is something you should confirm with the chassis OEM. And I will show you how to share a calculation with other stakeholders, such as chassis dealers, later on. So let's try this truck out in Delaware then. And before we do that, I guess I just want to point out the limits. So we've got about 22,500 pounds, where I'm looking at the permissible row here, the third row from the bottom. 22,500 on the front, 13 for the pusher, 36 on the tandem at the rear, 42,000 for the triaxle group, and 56,000 in total. And a payload of 30,703 before I change from New York State to Delaware. And again, we'll go to Delaware State roads. You see that the payload has jumped by over 10,000 pounds, moving from New York State road regulations to Delaware State road regulations. It's now at 40,849 pounds. And you'll see here that the front and pusher axles limits didn't change. They're still at 22,400 and 13,000. But the limit of 36,000 for axles 3 and 4 rose to 40,000. The limit of 42 for axles 2 to 4 rose to 59,000. And most significantly of all, the total limit rose from 56,000 to 73,280. And as you can see from the yellow or the blue highlighting on axles 3 to 4, the tandem is the limiting factor with a utilization of 100%. Paul, have you any questions yet that you'd like to bring in here?
Hi, Sorka. Yeah, there have been a few good comments, and actually one comment that was good was I like the comment is that it's a great tool for trucking companies to use to determine legal payload limits for various rate configurations. But the gentleman points out that it's difficult to get those trucking companies to, or it might be difficult to get to those trucking companies to use such a tool. So I think it's a good observation. But it's nice to see that you can get to a good, accurate estimate of the amount of payload that you can then tell the trucking company that they are allowed to put onto that truck. So that's one comment in particular that was interesting.
Okay. Is that it for now?
Yeah, I think so. I think I've answered a few other questions, like for instance, whether there can be the weight shown per axle, and just to point out that the weight is actually shown for the axle group. So if there's a tandem axle, then it's for the axle, it's for the two axles put together. But like as everyone can see, that the pusher is then separate to that. So it's assumed that tandem axle is equalized.
Okay.
Yeah.
Anything else of common interest?
I think that's good for now.
Okay, thanks,
But
Paul.
keep the questions coming for sure.
Yes, thanks for the comment about the trucking companies. TruckScience is used by a lot of different company types, I suppose, and that's probably reflected also in NTA membership, including some of those trucking companies, upfitters, chassis dealers, city fleets, body manufacturers, even accident reconstruction specialists, lots and lots of different company types, I guess. Okay, back to our example here. I had just pointed out that the limiting factor was axles 3 to 4 on 100%. So to get even more payload on there, we could try moving more weight onto that pusher axle. And to do that, I can click on the weights on the pusher to get a shortcut over here to the menu, or indeed I could open the menu from the top left-hand side here. And you'll see that there is a percentage of rear axle group weight carried, which can be specified for this pusher axle. It's currently at 22%, and I'm just going to move that up to 30%. And you'll see straight away there, the pusher axle is now the limiting factor. The blue highlighting has jumped onto the pusher column. But I'll also increase the gross axle weight rating of this pusher. We're on a current payload of 30,750. So I'll increase the gross axle weight rating for the pusher axle to 18,000, and the payload has jumped by about 15,000 pounds with that change. So yes, interestingly, when we moved the percentage, the payload dropped by about 10,000. And then when we increased the gross axle weight rating for the pusher, it jumped by another about 10,000. So the net effect was our payload went from about 40,000 to about 45,000. But as you can see, every little change has the potential to make a big difference to the payload figure. So we're getting, I guess we could say, really high weights on a truck with a relatively short wheelbase here. And that is because there is no bridge law on Delaware state roads. If you're already familiar with the interface, you may have noticed that the bridge view disappears from the right-hand side here for states in which bridge law is not applied. So that bridge icon did not appear in New York State and it's still not visible in Delaware, but it will come back later where bridge law applies. Okay, so note that the rear axles 3 to 4 are on 100% utilization. And as I pointed out before, utilization is just a way of expressing gross weight as compared to permissible weight. We're 40,000 gross on axles 3 to 4 of a total allowed of 40,000 as per the regulation limit. Even though that there's a rating of 46,000, we are limited to the 40. And so we've got 100% of the rear axle, we're utilizing 100% of the rear axle. But we've got underutilization of the front axle. And if you look at that, it's 56.8%. So we're underutilizing the front axle to the tune of about 45%. So let's experiment with loading the payload further towards the front by moving the payload center of gravity forward. To do that, I can simply click on this payload menu over here. And we will move the payload center of gravity. So the percentage, 50% is just denotes that the payload center of gravity is midway along the load deck. You can also express that in terms of inches if you prefer, but I'll just go back to percentages for now, and I'm going to reduce that to 36%, and you will see the payload center of gravity move forward when I make this change. Yes, indeed. And you will also, maybe the eagle-eyed among you will have noticed that the payload has also increased by doing that, jumped up to 48,000 from what was, I think, about 45,000. So now we're on payload of almost 49,000 pounds if we're loading our payload closer to the front of the vehicle. I'll also just point out here, and let me undo that change for a moment, because I want to show you this gross weight on the vehicle front as a percentage. With the payload loaded closer to the front, we have 26.7% of our gross weight on the front axle. If I undo that change and go back to 50% or load the payload evenly along the load deck, you'll see the gross weight on the vehicle's front axle drops to 18%. So we went from about 27% down to 18% of the gross weight on the front axle. And that's a measurement that's very interesting to a lot of our users, is what is that percentage of gross weight that's on the front axle at any point in time. So we're back to a payload of 45,360 and a payload center of gravity, an evenly distributed load again here. Any questions again, Paul?
Hi, Sorka. Yeah, I do have a few here that were interesting. One participant asked, is it safe to calculate a weight distribution with 100% utilization on axles? And my reply to that was that I guess that's to a large extent up to the users themselves, up to the users of our application themselves. But we do offer the organizational standards, which you can add to kind of highlight if you're at like a 95% limit. So you have that gross weight on vehicle front there highlighted, but if you like, you could add the gross weight on vehicle rear and put it at, let's say, 95%. And that would indicate to the user that there might be an issue there without going all the way to 100%.
Okay. And I can maybe just jump in here as well. So as Paul mentioned, that there is also the ability to add your own organization standards. These are, I guess, validations that are not stipulated by the manufacturer. They are not stipulated by the jurisdiction in which the vehicle will operate. But these are kind of what we call organization standards. And these are high standards that you put in place for your own organization. So you can show the utilization, the vehicle gross as a percentage of the permissible. So you can set a minimum and maximum for that, or you can just show the value. So you can show it as a percentage of the GVWR and a percentage of the permissible. So let's do that. And I'm just going to uncheck this one for now. I'm not going to set a range for the minimum and maximum for that. Okay, it doesn't like the fact that I unchecked that one. Let me delete it. Okay, so we've now added these as extra checks. So that's an interesting question. Thanks for raising it. The vehicle gross as a percentage of the GVWR is now 87%, and the vehicle gross as a percentage of the permissible is 95.3%. So as Paul said there, it is kind of a personal choice, I suppose, in a way, but the utilization is indicating what percentage of the lesser of the manufacturer limits and the state limits will allow you. I suppose in a way this comes down to personality type, how close to the edge you like to fly or how close to the sun. Any more questions before I carry on, Paul?
Just there was one quick question about seasonal state weight limits, and so I just wanted to point out that we do have the Quebec thaw limits in the app, and we've recently added some seasonal limits in Minnesota as well. So those are some seasonal limits that we have in the application as well.
Okay.
That's it for now, I think.
Thank you, Paul. I'll move on.
Mhm.
Okay, so I'm just going to take this truck then from Delaware. We'll clear those ones out and go to Idaho, Idaho State. We had a payload of 45,360 before I made this change. If I look through there. And we see our payload has dropped drastically by about 20,000 to 24,896 as we moved into Idaho State with this vehicle. And that is because the total permissible has dropped to 66,000 pounds. There's a limit of 37,800 for the tandem, and that's indicated under rear 2 to 4 here, permissible 37,800. And that applies to any group of axles with a distance of under 13 feet. So in this case, the pusher axle does not give us a higher limit on the tandem axle group. It's still 37,800 on axles. It's 37,800 on axles 3 to 4 and axles 2 to 4. And this really demonstrates that you need to know where you are. In some states, adding axles is the key. In other states, you don't get more by adding more axles. It comes down to the overall distance between front and rear axles. And because Idaho does have bridge law, you'll see that bridge icon has returned again. We can switch to that bridge view to examine the axle spread. And I'm just in particular paying attention to the second last row here, axles 2 to 4. We have a distance of 103 inches. And the maximum bridge limit is at 37,800. And that's giving us, you can see the maximum payload is highlighted on the drawing here of 24,896. So we need to get that dimension for axles 2 to 4, this rounded dimension, up to 13 feet, or in inches terms to 156 inches, in order to take advantage of higher limits in Idaho. So I'll find that dimension, axles 2 to 3. You can see it right here. It's currently at 49 inches. And I'm going to increase that to 97 inches. And if you just keep an eye on what's going to happen to those rounded figure and the max bridge figure in the second last row in the table below, you will see that moving this axle forward has a significant impact on the maximum for that axle group. So there we go. Having moved the axle forward, the rounded distance is now 13 feet. You can see it's rounded up there. And the bridge limit for the tridem group has increased to 56,470. So the effect of this on the payload is that the payload has increased by about 6,000 pounds. And you'll see it highlighted there on the body at 30,759. So if we go back to the weight summary view, you will note that we still have unused capacity of over 5,000 on the tridem axle group and of over 10,000 on the total permissible. So you'll see that unused capacity, second last line from the bottom there in the total column, 10,742. So we could try a longer body, and to do that, I'm going to just remove this body, increase the wheelbase to 254 inches, and opt for a longer body. Okay, and again, I'm going to just specify a cab gap there of 4 inches. Which is giving us another 4,000 pounds of payload, 34,832. We can see what happens when we move the first pusher axle back again and add a second one in front of that. So let's go to our axle 2 to 3 spacing again here. And we'll reduce that to 48 inches to move that axle 2 back. And I'm going to add a second pusher axle, this time with a spacing of 46 inches. So click on the chassis menu, weights and axles, add a pusher. And I'm going to specify a distance of 46 inches between the 2 pusher axles. The limiting factor is now that quad axle group, or axles 2 to 5. Again, it's indicated by the blue highlighting of 100% utilization. And if I go to the bridge view, I can see that the distance for axles 2 to 5, again, the second last row, that rounded distance is 12 feet. So again, we want to get that one up to 13 feet. So if we stay in the bridge view and just open the vehicle dialog, and I want you again to just watch that payload figure on the drawing as I make this change. So it's currently 23,248. But if I change the tandem spread, that's axles 4 to 5, from 54 up to 56. So literally just a 2-inch increase between those rear axles. We'll bring our rounded distance of the entire axle group to 13 feet and our payload up to 42,259 pounds, an increase of over 19,000 pounds. Any questions, Paul? It might be a good time to take a little break.
Yeah, for sure. There are a few other questions. Well, there's quite a few questions coming through. One that I could point out was the ability to stretch out the axles to handle the load or add more axles that are steerable and easier to make turns. So just a comment about modifying the vehicles, which you've been doing, but I just wanted to kind of point out that we do have the ability in the app to make those pusher axles that Sork has been adding to the truck to make them steerable or not, and that will impact that turning radius. So there is that ability to do that in the application, and then another participant was asking about which axles will be limiting the payload first, whether it's the axle that's at 100% is limiting the payload, and it's going to be either the axle or axle group that gets to 100% of its permissible, or the entire vehicle that's going to be limiting that payload. So it's whichever one of those gets to first. So those are a few interesting questions that came through.
Thanks, Paul. And thanks everybody for following along. We're not too far now, but we have still got a few more interesting observations to make, I guess. Yes, that was a particularly dramatic change there. The payload increased by about 19,000 pounds. And that's limited by the overall bridge in Idaho in the bottom row here of 68,510 pounds. If I go back to my weight summary view here, so I always access these buttons on the right-hand side to change the view. And you'll see we've got that 100%, as Paul just mentioned, any of the axle groups or the total permissible can be reached first. And it is always the limit that's reached first, obviously, that's going to limit the payload. So with all of these things, the permissible is calculated as the lesser of the manufacturer limits and the regulations. And then the payload is determined by the limit that is reached first. So you're kind of always being limited by the lesser of all of the time. Obviously there, you may it depends on kind of how bulky your payload is as well. You might run out of space before you run out of weight, but we can explore those kind of examples in a one-on-one session if you like. Okay, so yeah, as I said, in some states you get more weight by adding more axles. In others, it comes down to the overall distance between the axles. So it's just really important, I guess, to know where you are and what limits apply. TruckScience automatically maximizes the payload against the relevant limits in the current jurisdiction. So that will save you a lot of spreadsheets, I suppose, and digging around looking for regulations, etc. But whether you're doing this by spreadsheet or using a program like this or scribbling on the back of an envelope, it's just important that you do these weight studies. Okay, so let's take the truck across the border then. I'm finding it hard myself to know where I am at any point in time here, but we're going to move from Idaho into Washington State. So because federal bridge will be applied as opposed to Idaho state bridge with its 13-foot rules, you'll see what happens here to the permissible. The total bridge limit falls from 68,000 that we just had in Idaho state, 68,500, down to 63,000. The pusher's permissible is also reduced from what was 13,000 in Idaho state regulations. It's now down to 11,600 because in Washington you've got 500 pounds per inch of tire width on 2 tire axles. And if we check the tire width, we can see that, so we go to weights and axles, you can find the particular axle, and go to this tires tab here, and you'll see that the tire width is 11.6. So you've got 2 tires, 500 pounds per inch each, and that's where we come up with this limit of 11,600. In any case, we're down to 36,500 pounds of payload. And without further ado, let's move on to Minnesota Interstate. There is no change at all to the payload in this case because, again, federal bridge laws are applied. To see how Minnesota compares to Iowa, we can simply lock the payload. So I go to the payload dialog here, and to lock that payload at 36,468, I simply just click on this checkbox. Payload is no longer maximized. It is locked at 36,468. So we're not going to remove the regulations for Minnesota, but I am going to click into this regulatory compliance so you can see the breakdown. And I will add regulations for Iowa here. And I'm going to choose regulations for Iowa state and interstate. You can choose up to 5 sets of regulations at a time. Okay, this is the first time we see the red highlighting, and that's because we're no longer calculating what's the maximum we can achieve. We have locked our payload at 36,500. And you can see from this dashboard on the left-hand side that this configuration is still legal in Iowa on the interstate. It was already legal in Minnesota on the interstate, but there's a problem on Iowa state roads. From the utilization score here in the bottom right, you can see that we're 5.4% over the limit on Iowa state roads. payload was 36,468. But if I unlock it or unoverride it, I'll be able to see what's the maximum achievable on Iowa state roads. And that's down to 33,249. And that's based on the gross weight limit of 59,500 on Iowa state roads. And again, when we have 3 sets of regulations chosen here, we have to comply with what the most restrictive is. In that case, it's the Iowa state regulations at 59,500. You may remember that that limit was 63,000 on Minnesota interstate. Okay, lastly, we're just going to try this configuration in Canada, or just take it right up to Canada. So I'll change my measurement to metric, and I'll clear those regulations and go to Ontario. Okay, so you can see we've run into some difficulty here, but we have some tips that appear at the bottom left here to help you understand what's going on. And we are informed that a maximum of 1 pusher axle is permitted on trucks with a 6x4 axle layout under regulations for Ontario. The pusher axle may not be deployed on semi-trailer combinations, but obviously we have 2 pusher axles on here, and if a maximum of 1 is permitted, we're going to have to remove one. So let's just close that and remove this frontmost pusher. So things are looking a little bit better now, but we do have another tip to consume here. And that tells us that to qualify for higher permissible weights based on load equalization, you may wish to consider adjusting the portion of weight carried by the pusher to approximately 33%. So let's click on that pusher axle. Note that that formula varies depending on the truck designation. And if I pop over here to the notes, I can see that this, that we are validating against Schedule 23 designated truck 5 in this case. And you'll find that under notes and warnings over here, notes, regulations applied. Okay, so it recommended that we reduce that we increase this to 33% as per the tip. Before I do that, just note that the tandem limit here is 15,000 kilos. And having made that change, that limit increases from 15,000 to 18,000 kilos. The payload is just over 15,000 kilos. But we can see that there is still a non-compliance issue as denoted by this red X. And that there's a dimension that's highlighted in red here on the drawing, if you can see that. So let's go back to our notes and warnings to see what the problem is. It's saying the distance from the liftable axle to the rear driven axles of 1219 does not meet the regulatory minimum of 2510. So let's just apply that minimum, 2510 there, instead of 1219. Okay, so the red highlighting has gone away. We no longer have that issue. We still do have an issue, but it no longer relates to the axle spread dimension. So let's go back to the warnings yet again. And we see that the mass on the steering axle of 5446 does not meet the required minimum of 23% of the gross mass. Okay, so I'm just going to increase the axle rating here for the pusher axle from 8165 to 9500. And I'll also change the tire width from 295 to 445 millimeters. I'm also going to move the center of gravity of the payload forward as we did earlier. And you'll see as I tick it up, as I use this ticker here and move the center of the weight further towards the front by moving its center of gravity, we should eventually reach a point where everything is back in green, and that is right here. So with this horizontal center of gravity of the payload of 41%, we are all in the green. Ontario provincial SPIF regulations are now happy. We've got a nice Schedule 23 dump truck for Ontario. And finally, payload of almost 24,000 kilos. Any questions, Paul?
Yes, Circa. Yeah, we do have a few more questions. A request for some Wisconsin winter month weights. So I just mentioned that we would look into that. Then there was a question about, just to clarify, that we can show like the state and interstate regulations on the dashboard at the same time. But then I think that you showed that when you were had those Iowa regulations. I think it was, you had the state and interstate on there at the same time, and you can put up to 5 in that dashboard, and you'll have a compliance for each of those at the same point in time. And then there was one question just about how to sign up. So maybe at the end you could show where on the web page we can go and do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Paul.
Thanks.
I'm conscious that I am over time, but I will carry on if people are happy to wait for another couple of minutes. I have finished moving around from state to state, so I'm just going to wrap up by showing you how to print a report, and I will also show you where to sign up. If you're in a hurry and you want to get off the webinar now, feel free to go to our website, TruckScience.com, click Start Free Trial, and you'll be straight into this interface that you can see here. So yeah, and thank you for coming along, but I'm going to carry on now for another 5 minutes or so. If you're happy to wait, stay here, that would be great. Okay, so now we've got this, we're at a point where we're ready to share our calculation with others or print a report for sign off. So I mentioned earlier I would show you how to share your calculation with, for instance, a chassis dealer. So to do that, you simply just save your calculation, give it a name, put it in a folder. You can save it and then you can share it. And you can invite others to view this calculation. You can include some comments, and you can allow them to edit and overwrite your calculation, giving them control over your work, or you can allow them to just view what you've done and save a copy to their own profile if you don't want them to make changes to your own calculation. Okay, that's how to share. If you would like to print or share a PDF document, you simply just click on this PDF report here. And I want to just show you a couple of new features here for, especially for existing users of the tool. You can now annotate these reports with, for instance, your signature. Just have a sample signature here. Rubber stamps. For instance, this approved, or whatever it is that you want to stamp on there. You can upload a logo, for instance. If you want to show the customer, I guess, what this might look like with their own logo on the door. And you can also add extra text to explain maybe some features or something you've discussed. So you can add some text in there, and that will be included then in your PDF report. So those 4 features are new there. More good news for existing users is that the much requested shared folders are on their way. I have seen that development work in the development environment already. It's looking very nice, so you can expect to see it soon. This will allow you to share your calculations in what will essentially behave like a shared drive for your team. So that has been requested frequently, and our developers are working on it as we speak. So that wraps up the demo. We will be happy to set up, personalized demos for anyone who would like to work through their own calculation. So I'm quickly going to flick back to my presentation for a couple of minutes, or not even, and we'll wrap up then. So let me just flick back over there. I wonder if anyone was able to guess the payload. Anyway, as we traveled from New York to Delaware, Idaho, Washington, Minnesota, Iowa, and lastly up to Ontario, that payload did fluctuate from around 25,000 to over 50,000 pounds. So hopefully, if you haven't already been thinking about this topic, that may have sparked some thought with you. We can't ever really say how much payload a truck can carry without first asking where that truck will operate. I know we've covered a lot in a very short time. As I said, if you'd like to set up a personalized demo for yourself or colleagues who weren't able to attend, I will be happy to do that with you. And you can do that right away by choosing a time on my calendar, calendly.com/ and it's just my name with a hyphen in the middle. You can also reply to any of the emails you received about the webinar to ask for that link. If you would like to find out more about TruckScience, you'll find us on NTA's website, nta.com TruckScience. There's more videos on truckscience.com. I will be back in Louisville for the Utility Expo show in October, and back in Sandusky, Ohio for NTA's CVIS, or Commercial Vehicle Upfitting Summit, also in October, where I'll be happy to run through a personalized demo with you right there and then. If you're not already using TruckScience, you can help yourself to a free trial. Go to truckscience.com, start free trial. NTA members who add their membership details will have their trial automatically extended from 7 to 30 days and will also qualify for a discount of $100 at checkout. So that's all for today. Sorry for running over time. Some great questions which helped to extend the webinar. Paul, are you wanting to jump in with some more questions before we go, or
No, I just wanted to thank everybody for the questions and for participating in the webinar. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Paul. I'm going to end the webinar now in just a moment. Before you go, please rate the webinar. Leave any comments or questions or requests for more information. Thank you for joining us, and goodbye.